I've missed him, you know. I miss him on Twitter, where he's still locked out to the best of my knowledge. But I miss him because so much time has elapsed since we last heard his beautiful dark brown voice and pondered how great it would be if Garland Nixon could be in political office in the United States. He's not for now, but he is therefore able to speak with us. Speaking of red ties and blue ties, I see you're wearing your Republican colours, Garland. It's not been a great day for the red team. It's not been a great week for the red team in Washington, has it?
No, but I think that what we're looking at, particularly with the Epstein files, is far bigger than the blue or red team. In fact, I'll say this. If I were answering your poll, I would try to find a way to answer yes and no. For this reason, what we saw evidence of things that we already either knew or suspected. Jeffrey Epstein, one of his closest business partners and friends was an Israeli prime minister. He was involved in spreading and acquiring technology for Israel. He was involved in, a weapons laundering, gun running, you name it. And every single time it comes back to Israel. So I think we have a pretty good idea who was behind the Epstein island, debacle, as it were, intelligence operation. So to some extent, can we say that there's things that they may want to hide wherein Donald Trump was involved? But I would say this, the people who are behind this would much prefer that we discuss this through the lens of partisanship, through the lens of, was Donald Trump on there? Was Bill Clinton on there? Was Garland Nixon on the island? Whoever. I think they'd rather us have this discussion than the truth, which is our collective governments, which I would say are the British, the U.S., and at minimum, and the Israelis, were involved in child trafficking, child prostitution, and God only knows what else.
Well, I mean, Garland, you, of course, make a devastatingly important point, and believe me, I fully intended to go there with you. But first, I'd like your genuine view. You can educate me out of mine. These kind of obfuscations, this kind of disruptive and reckless frustration of the process of Congress, which told them that on Friday they had to publish in full all these files. They didn't publish all the files, and the files they did publish look ludicrous. They are redacted to the point of absurdity. And my point is, not only is that not a good look, it will not stand, it will not hold, it will merely fuel this issue, probably for the rest of Trump's presidency. And when the dam breaks after Trump leaves office, this is going to run and run, isn't it?
Yes, I certainly agree with you 100%. I think what we're looking at here now is a system that has to make a decision, right? It's kind of like triage, like when there's a multiple deaths and they have to look at one person and say, this person has a better chance to survive, and so we'll deal with this person. What they're looking at now is, okay, if we release this stuff, the truth, what's the damage? And if we continue to obfuscate and try and continue to go against what we know we have to do, what do we suffer? And I think they've made a determination that they really can't afford to let the truth out. That it's like the government will almost fall. What will the American people do what will the British people do if they find out the truth about this? So they're in a situation where they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. And I think they figured out now that they won't. They know that the American people now really don't. I'll be honest. I didn't expect them to tell the truth. I expected something similar to this. In fact, let me add this. Think about the JFK files. The law said they had to release these after a certain number of years, and they still haven't released them. And of course, even in that instance, there are numerous rumors that the documents that haven't been released regarding the JFK files are also related to Israel in some manner. So I think we see a consistent pattern here.
Well, Ben Shapiro would say the JFK case was a very long time ago. On the other hand, a promise that was made 3,000 years ago, according to a book written by themselves, well, That is as good as a title deed, but I digress. But you take me back to Israel, about which I spoke in my monologue. And it is surely even the most myopic American citizen, the most myopic American policymaker, influencer, must have noticed by now that Israel's like the bad penny that keeps turning up in all of these scandals, as it surely is central to the Epstein affair, isn't it?
Absolutely. And what's interesting is Israel is now central to American politics in a way that it never has been before, in that the two principal parties now are, wrought with infighting. Certainly, the Democratic Party recently has announced that they will not be releasing the document. Apparently, after they lost in the last election, apparently they did some kind of research to figure out why they lost. They came up with a document, and they're not going to release it. Well, certainly in that document, the numbers that have been released elsewhere show that upwards of 30% of the people that voted for Joe Biden that wouldn't vote for Kamala Harris, it was due to the genocide in Gaza. So they certainly can't release that document. It would either have to be in there, or it would be quite conspicuous that they left it out. Meanwhile, which I think is very healthy, the Republican Party, insiders are at each other's throats, as Ben Shapiro versus Megyn Kelly versus even the pro-Zionists are fighting Tucker Carlson, et cetera. And I think the Republican Party is having at it over Israel. And the big fear, something that I've been actually reporting on and talking about for a while, the big fear that I think the machine has in America is that a number of anti-Zionist candidates will be challenging some of the traditional politicians, and there's a likelihood that some of them will win. And will we get the Romania treatment when democracy decides that anti-Zionists should win a seat? I have my doubts as to whether or not either of these parties are going to allow people to win who are opposed to the domination of the Israeli government over both the U.S. and all of Europe.
Yeah, but I mean, Ceausescu had no intention of letting the people win either when he went out on that balcony on this day in 1989. And I wrote a book about these events called Downfall, with my good friend Bob Wiley, Downfall, the Ceausescus and the Romanian Revolution. When he went out on that balcony, he had no idea that the last straw had been loaded on the camel's back and that the back was about to break. I'm wondering about watching again the Ceausescu moment, whose anniversary is today. I wonder if there is a possibility that a reckoning is coming. Not just for your leaders, and heaven knows they need it, but the leaders in Europe who are pursuing a national suicidal policy. It's not suicidal for them, they're quids in, but it is literally committing suicide as a continent, as nation states. I'm wondering if the Romanian people could do it, why can't we?
Well, I think that that is right now on the horizon for Europe. I think that unfortunately, there's not just a possibility, but a probability of political unrest and violence coming soon. Because if we're honest about it, the European bloc has effectively collapsed as a modern political entity. This is not a modern political entity, much less a liberal democracy, because in order to be a reasonable political entity, there has to be some connection between the masses, between the working class, and the leadership. They have to have some kind of connection. In Brussels, the leadership was talking about how they could literally borrow money so they could go in debt. And as I always say, what's the definition of a debt? It is a claim on future earnings or a claim on future income. So they were selling the future of Europe for a war that's already lost, that probably won't be able to be financed more than a few months. At the same time, the farmers, the people who put food in people's mouths, were outside on the street screaming, basically begging for mercy from these same people. And I guess their response was not to cover it in the news. to hide it. So yes, Europe has already collapsed as a modern political entity. It's just a matter of how this thing plays out. And unfortunately, I'll add this for the European people: by the time they get these lunatics out of office, they're going to be in debt for the next 100 years.
Well, I mean, you say 100 years, we literally are. We've signed a document with a leather-bound folder with Zelensky, who won't be there this time next year, with Ukraine, which will not be the state that it was this time next year. But we are committed in writing, in treaty form, to give them 3 billion British pounds for the next 100 years. Who does that? Who makes political decisions for the next 100 years? What madmen are they?
Clearly, the political class of in Europe are no longer rational actors. And in fact, they're the most isolated political group on earth, in that they are isolated from both Russia and China. They were at odds with Russia, and they're always preaching against China. They're at odds with their own constituents, because almost all of them now have approval ratings far below 20%. And of course, they're at a rhetorical and philosophical war with the government of the United States. Who's on these people's sides? Their people hate them. The U.S. government hates them. They hate the Russians and the Chinese. This is a political and an economic isolation that I've never seen before in my life, voluntarily at that.
Beautifully expressed. I wish I'd said it, and you can be sure that I will. The promise to seize Russian assets foundered on the rocks of our new hero, the Prime Minister of Little Belgium. The war on their own people that you describe so eloquently is, of course, not only an economic war of national suicide, but a political, a civil liberties. You're a man that used to be very prominent in those affairs. Civil liberties virtually extinct now in the European Union space. And of course, I include Britain, which voted to leave the European Union, but only so we could behave just as stupidly and beastly as them. I'm in exile. Gayatri's in exile. Jacques Baud, a Swiss army colonel who used to advise NATO, has just now been non-personed and stuck in limbo. He's a Swiss citizen, though Switzerland isn't in the EU, but because he was in Brussels when this pronunciamento came from the lips of von der Leyen, he's now marooned in Brussels. Can't go to Switzerland, for that would require flying over or travelling across European Union territory. And his assets have been seized. A citizen of a non-EU country has his assets seized by the EU for what? For words, for speaking. You know, my father-in-law is very anxious, of course, about me and Gayatri's situation. He was questioning me closely, as any father-in-law would do. What's happened? How have I got his daughter into trouble? I had to reassure him that when they say hostile acts against the British state, they mean words. They don't mean a smoking cannonball. They don't mean even a pebble. They don't mean the slightest physical or kinetic harm of any kind. What they mean is words. Gayatri and I are speaking words that they don't like, which they can then define as harming the national security of Great Britain, a country that I have been born in, lived in, and had hoped to die in. So civil liberty, liberal democracy, all the guff they told us for decades, for half a century, that they represented, It's all in ruins, Garland.
Or perhaps it's not that it's in ruins. It's perhaps that we never had them in the first place. If you feel that you have the right to free speech, as long as you say things that doesn't bother the government too much, and as soon as you start saying things that they're really concerned with, they say you can't do that. The fact was you never really had the free speech that you thought you had. You just weren't threatening enough that they had to clamp down on them. I mean, recently, yes, you probably know, I spent some time in Russia and Belarus and other places. And after that, I thought, I don't really want to fly to Europe for any reason now, because after going there, they may suspect me as some kind of an agent, and I may never make it back. It makes sense to me that people who live in an absurd narrative such as them, they don't live in the kinetic world that we live in. They live in a world of metaphysical realities, where they talk about things, and therefore, because they say the Russians are running out of missiles and they say the Russians are losing, that means they must be losing. People who live in that kind of world where the only thing that matters is narratives, their concern would be things that you say, because they don't live in a world of physical things. They just make something up, and that's the reality. That's why they're so concerned with censorship, with what people say, with shutting down various narratives, because they don't have artillery and hypersonic missiles and air defense. All they have is a narrative and some NAFO trolls on Twitter. And that's all they have to fight with. So that's where their concerns are. But I suspect that people who are this politically estranged from their constituents, that their time is short and they know it. What we're seeing is, the last howls of a dying mule or whatever it is. They're on their way out. And we're seeing these deranged acts as they head out. And these acts will only speed up their demise. And I think the people of Europe are going to be screaming for something to replace this soon. So I don't think they're going to be able to keep this up more than a year or so. And I suspect by midsummer, if not earlier, when this whole Ukraine project starts to go bad, that some of these people will be doing the Ashraf Ghani move from Afghanistan, heading for the airport with a pile of cash falling into the back of the boots of their cars.
If there's any left. Finally, Garland, and I'm grateful for your time. I feel like a bit of a chump. I didn't think that Donald Trump was going to attack and invade Venezuela. It's beginning to look like I'm wrong about that. What's your take?
Well, from the very beginning, my position has been I don't believe Donald Trump will invade Venezuela. Number one, Venezuela is 3 times the size of Vietnam, and 500,000 troops wouldn't get it done in Vietnam. 16,000 troops is not going to get it done. It's not even a plausible number to present an option for a land invasion, number one. Number two, what are they going to do? Fly over, throw some bombs, throw some missiles at Venezuela for a few weeks, and then what? It's a trap right now, I think, that Donald Trump is in, because if he attacks Venezuela with, might I add, a 30% support, according to the polls in the United States. And the day the first soldier dies, that's going to drop to 15%. So Donald Trump's in a situation where if he does it without the support of the people, and then Americans die, which I think is almost inevitable, the support will collapse, and then as will his presidency. So I don't think he attacks. He can't go to war with them, because airstrikes without a land invasion is not a war. So I don't think he can go to war with them. And even if he does airstrikes, it's so big. The country is so big, you could bomb a few areas, but I'm sure everything's hidden in the jungle. After they've been telling them for the last 2 months that they were going to attack, I guarantee you those bases are empty of everything, and things are hidden and camouflaged under these triple canopy jungles. So I don't think there's much Donald Trump can do. I will say this. In a way, it's a trap, but not really, because Donald Trump doesn't think twice about backing out. Donald Trump will say, we're going to win, we're going to take them, and he'll wake up one morning and say, never mind, we're leaving. So maybe that's what happens. Donald Trump wakes up one morning and says, I changed my mind. Let's leave. That's probably the great likelihood.
But look how reckless it's got. 2 of the 3 tankers seized this week are Chinese tankers. You're seizing sovereign, in one case, sovereign Chinese assets and oil that China has already paid for, and you're towing it to Florida. I mean, how can that possibly end well?
No, and I think at some point they're going to provoke China to the point where China looks at the deal that we have that's supposed to be a 1-year economic deal with China that allows the United States to access the rare earth minerals that it desperately needs, allows the U.S. to access these minerals that it desperately needs to continue its quest for to regain hegemony. I think if we keep provoking China, they're going to pronounce that deal dead. They pretty much said that we were kind of on trial to see how things work. So on any given day, China can just say, you know what, we've decided that you've taken our tanks. That's not part of the deal. So you get no rare earth minerals. Have a nice day. So it's absurd on its face. I don't think China will engage in a military engagement on this. But the bottom line is, what else is Trump going to do? If he can't do a military attack, it's kind of an economic attack. Again, I think he's painted himself into a corner and he's doing things that aren't going to help in any way. It's a harassment act, but the Venezuelans have been dealing with sanctions and terrorism, CIA attacks for the last, 3 or 4 decades. I don't think a couple more months is going to change their minds and cause them to capitulate in any way, shape, or form.